Today's first witness is Terence Austin.
Yeah.
Okay, if you'd like to stand up, please, and repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please sit down.
Thank you very much. Could you give your full name, please?
Terence Paul Austin.
Mr. Austin, in front of you, you should have a witness statement.
Yes, I do.
Yes. Could I ask you to turn to the final page? That's page 19. Can you confirm that that is your signature?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and it's dated the 13th of September of this year. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. For the purpose of the transcript, the statement is WITN 041900100. And Mr. Austin, that statement will, and its exhibits will go into evidence, so I'm not going to repeat lots of matters that are contained therein. We're going to spend about half a day going through various matters. I'm going to start with your background. You spent 40 years in the IT sector, is that right?
That's correct.
And you joined ICL as a program director in 1995?
Correct.
And you were employed specifically to deliver the benefit card and the electronic point of sale system, is that right?
The whole solution with regard to the ITT.
So I think you said you were responsible for delivering the IT pathway solution, is
Yes,
that right?
correct.
You became systems director at some point.
Yes, there was a period of time of several months after we started, but after award of contract, where it was obvious that the requirement was expanding tremendously, and it was felt that we should reorganize the team so that I would then take responsibility for the solution, and that one of my colleagues would come in and take over the position as a program director. So I relinquished areas such as implementation, training, business requirements, etc., so that they went elsewhere within the ICL pathway organisation.
And you left in October 2000.
I did.
Would it be right to say that you were the senior technical director of the Horizon program?
No, it wouldn't.
Were you the most senior individual who had responsibility for the IT pathway solution within ICL?
Yes,
Were you part of the management structure?
I was.
Were you happy with how ICL was being managed at the time?
Yes. I was recruited specifically for the ICL pathway project.
Did you have faith in its internal controls and internal processes as a company?
I was not familiar with the internal processes because I was brought on specifically to do the ITT, to look at the ITT for the ICL pathway program.
But as your career developed, did you have faith in the
Within the
internal
ICL
processes?
pathway, yes.
Did you think it was a good company at scrutinizing itself?
Yes.
And did it have an effective audit process, for example?
ICL itself,
Yes.
I wasn't aware of it, but I assume there was. We introduced our own within the ICL pathway.
So within ICL pathway, were you happy with the audit process?
Yes.
Can we look at FUJ 000-80690? This is the Epos Pinnacle Task Force report. You can ignore, I think, the date on the top right-hand corner because the Epos Pinnacle Task Force was, as it says on the front page, in place between the 19th of August and 18th of September 1998. Do you remember
I do.
this document? Do you remember seeing the document at the time?
I do.
It has your name on the distribution. Can you tell us about the authors? The author, if we look just below that, it has J. Holmes and D. McDonnell. J. Holmes is, I think, Jan Holmes. I think we've been pronouncing it Jan, but it's Jan Holmes.
It is.
And he was the audit manager, is that right?
He was.
And who was D. McDonnell?
That was another person within the audit team, as far as I can recall.
Would it be right, do you think he was the Deputy Development Manager? Is that a title you remember?
I remember the title, but I don't remember the name, I'm afraid.
And from what you've said about the audit process at ICL Pathway, presumably you had faith in them in carrying out that task.
Well, I was the instigator of the task force.
Yes, so you appointed the right individuals to carry out that task.
Yes, which was Jan.
Of drafting the report.
Yes.
Did you have any reason not to believe what they said in the report?
The reason I hesitate is that auditors are not technical people. They interview people and they draw conclusions, and they then summarise those conclusions and their recommendations.
But I think Jan Holmes was the auditor, but Mr. McDonnell was
The Deputy Development
a
Director.
technical man. Can we look at page 4 of that document, please? This is the introduction, and I'm going to just read from the second paragraph for the purpose of the transcript. It says, "This report presents the outcome of the task force activity and identifies factors which prevented the original target, 0 or near 0 residual pinnacles, being met." Now, pinnacles are error logs or incident
Defects,
logs.
yeah.
During the course of the task force, it became clear that there are significant deficiencies in the Epos product, its code and design, and these are also presented in this report. Finally, the report contains recommendations from the authors, which we believe should be implemented by the programme to address the shortcomings identified. So that's the very first section of this 20-page document, and it's highlighting there that there were, in their view, significant deficiencies in the Epos product, its code and design. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, yes.
And could we turn over the page to page 5, please, and the top half of that page? In summary, it says there that they had spent 5 weeks trying to get the pinnacles down to 0, and it's the second paragraph there. The position at 1300 hours on the 18th of September is that 166 pinnacles have been fixed and closed, and 165 remain in WIP. Is that work in progress?
Yes.
This indicates that the task force has failed to meet its primary objective. So they closed 166, but 155 remained. Presumably that indicates a significant remaining problem despite the task force having closed a number of pinnacles.
It does.
Moving over to page 7 of this report, there is a section on Epos code. And again, for the purpose of the transcript, I appreciate it. It's a relatively long passage, but I'm going to read it. It says, "It is clear that senior members of the task force are extremely concerned about the quality of code in the Epos product. Earlier this year, the Epos code was re-engineered by Escher, and the expectation is that the work carried out in Boston was to a high standard and of good quality. Since then, many hundreds of pinnacle fixes have been applied to the code, and the fear is that code decay will, assuming it hasn't already, cause the product to become unstable. This presents a situation where there is no guarantee that the pinnacle fix or additional functionality can be made without adversely affecting another part of the system. However, a more worrying concern from the programme's perspective should be the reliance on the Epos product in its current state as a basis for planning and delivery. During the task force, there was relatively little testing that directly impacted Epos, and yet over 200 pinnacles, roughly 50 per week, were raised. Immediately following the conclusion of the task force, it is intended to rerun system test main pass and various other test streams. While I'm confident that the fixes delivered by the task force will prove to be reliable, I fully expect the pinnacle rates to increase as further testing is carried out." Now, concerns that were expressed there include that the code will decay. Do you remember that?
I do.
That's, I think, a term that's used to describe where there's a reduction in reliability and effectiveness.
That's what it's implying, yeah.
Over time. And that could, for example, affect things like the cache and counter performance, potentially.
Potentially, yeah.
And can we look at page 17 of the same document, please? Paragraph 7.3, existing code. NB, this section has been produced with the assistance of Dave McDonnell and Martin Smith and their combined experience of structured programming. Do you remember who Martin Smith was at all?
I'd be one of the team, one of the programmers.
So again, two technical experts. They say, although parts of the Epos code are well written, significant sections are a combination of poor technical design, bad programming, and ill thought out bug fixes. The negative impact of these factors will continue and spread as long as the Pinnacle fixing culture continues. This is partly due to the nature/size of the bug fixing task, and partly due to the quality and professionalism of certain individuals within the team. And then over the page, whoever wrote this code clearly has no understanding of elementary mathematics or the most basic rules of programming. That's all pretty damning, isn't it?
Very much so.
And presumably that would have been quite well known amongst the team at the time.
Maybe amongst the team, but not amongst the managing part of the team.
So I think if we turn to the first page of this document, it shows the distribution. There is yourself there, Mr. Bennett, Mr. McDonnell, and then it says library. Do you know what that was a reference to?
It'll be stored in the library of the audit team, I believe.
And would the information from this report have been, you say it was known to the team, who would have known about?
Well, the reason for me asking for the task force in the first place was that I wasn't very happy with the way the product was. So I felt let down by the people who developed it, who were supposed to be experts in their field. So because I was getting reports that the product was not stable and that it was not behaving in the way that we would expect, I called the task force. So I called the task force together and brought in the people who I thought were the most competent people within my team to be able to look into this and see what was going on. And it was as a result of that that Jan writes a report at the end of their activity. And when I received this report, which was, as you quite rightly say, very damning, and a massive worry to me and the rest of ICL Pathway, we had to take every part of it extremely seriously. So we took, I called in all the members of the task force and my lead designer, and we went through every element of it to find out what we could do and what options we had to do. We identified who the people were that were responsible for producing the product in its particular state, and they were removed from the team. So that we were starting off with a different team that was looking at it and designing it and managing it.
Do you remember who was removed from the team at all?
No, I'm sorry, I can't. I genuinely can't.
So this was 1998.
Yeah.
We then have another report in 1999 that I'd like to take you to. That's
First of all, sorry to interrupt, I'd just like to say that as a result of the various meetings following this, we went into a corrective action plan. So we decided what actions we needed to take in order to get the product into the state that we were happy with.
So let's look what happened a year later, 1999, and that is FUJ 000797782. This is the CSR Plus development audit. Very briefly, can you tell us what CSR Plus was?
Core system release, I believe.
And that was also conducted by Jan Holmes, if we scroll down a little bit. So the audit manager conducted this audit. Can we look at page 6, please? and scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's a section on audit conduct and how the audit was conducted. It explains there that there were some 35 interviews over a 4-week period between September and October 1999. So quite a comprehensive
Absolutely,
audit.
yes.
And as I said, this is a year on from the Holmes-McDonnell report that we
But
just
this is an audit of the entire release, so it's the entire product, not
Yes.
just the Epos product.
Can we look at page 7, please? And 2.5. This addresses next steps, and it says there in the first paragraph that there was an opportunity during the week of the 8th of November to challenge any recommendations that were made in that report. It's page 19, as you say, there are plenty of pages that address other aspects of CSR+, and it's page 19 that addresses Epos. And again, I'm going to read a fair bit out, I'm afraid. It says, from the CSR Plus perspective, the development of the Epos product has been successful, with software drops being made according to planned schedules and confidence in the team that future drops will also be archived on time. Unfortunately, Epos continues to be resource hungry in dealing with live problems associated with CSR and ensuring that these fixes are brought forward and incorporated into the CSR Plus product. The Epos Task Force report, which we've already seen, raised the question of the maintainability and resilience of the Epos code following the 6-week Pinnacle blitz, where some 550 Pinnacles were processed. Since then, so a year later, a further approximately 996 Pinnacles have been raised using the product equals Epos and target release equals IR-CSR or PDR-CSR search criteria. And these can only have had a detrimental effect on the quality of the code. In particular, the maintainability, resilience, and potential for change aspects must be subject to doubt. The report also identified many instances of poor programming technique and application of coding standards, and while CSR Plus changes have been reviewed by the team leader, no attempts have been made to address the significant body of code not affected. There is also anecdotal evidence that Epos components used by other applications are fragile and cause problems for the calling application. Print server was mentioned by both LFS and APS counter teams. So resource hungry, it sounds as though it required a lot of attention. Is that right?
That's correct.
It's been, well, there are 996 more Pinnacles have been raised. So it's got worse since that Epos task force were carrying out their job in terms of the number of Pinnacles at least. Would you agree with that?
That's correct.
Pinnacle fixes can only have a detrimental effect on the code. Presumably, again, that's a reference to code decay or something similar to that.
Correct.
And it says CSR Plus changes have been reviewed by the team leader. Who was that team leader a reference to? Do you know?
I would imagine that would be Steve Warwick.
Okay. Can we go over the page, please? The figures indicate that the problems facing Epos during the task force period have not diminished. Of greater concern are the non-Epos Pinnacles within the group, suggesting that there are still serious quality problems in this vital custom-facing element of the system. And then there's a box there, and the box says, the Epos solution report made specific recommendations to consider the redesign and rewrite of Epos, in part or in whole, to address the then known shortcomings. In light of the continued evidence of poor product quality, these recommendations should be reconsidered. Now, is that box a recommendation?
It's saying that we should reconsider the rewrite option.
But I think we saw at the beginning of this report that there was an opportunity to object to particular recommendations by the 8th of November. I think it was talking about those kinds of things, wasn't it, as a recommendation?
Yeah. Actually, what I'm finding, yeah, I'm struggling because this was a massive issue for me, and I discussed it with all my technical team in depth. Rewriting a product is not necessarily a solution in itself, because you can reintroduce problems, or you can have people who don't understand the requirement as well, and you can actually end up with a product that's even maybe a little better, but not necessarily any better. My preferred solution at the time, having spoken to all the people, is that the decay was in certain parts of the product, and we should focus our efforts and see if we can stabilize those parts that were causing the majority of the pinnacles. And in fact, this was a view strongly felt by Steve Warwick, who I had a lot of respect for.
And we'll come to see how your view was that you weren't in favour of a rewrite.
Well, not initially. It was still an option on the table. I hadn't dismissed it. I just felt that it wasn't necessarily. We should explore other avenues first before taking that pretty drastic course of action.
But it was a recommendation from ICL Pathways auditor Jan Holmes.
It was a recommendation.
Yes. And can we look at page 47 of this document, please? These are the terms of reference of the audit. And can we look over the page to reporting? It says there, a final report will be produced and distributed to the director and senior managers of the development directorate, as well as the managing, deputy managing and QRM directors. And then it has a list of the distribution, at least of the terms of reference, and you're listed there as first. Now, it's not in alphabetical order, but you're first. Is that because it was you were the most senior, or that it was most appropriate to you?
No, Mike Holmes was most senior. It was because it was most appropriate to me.
Thank you. Can we please go to FUJ 000-79783, please? This was a month later, and following the audit, there were a list of corrective actions that needed to take place, and this sets those out. So I think effectively it sets out the recommendations and what's being done about them. You are listed as a recipient, and throughout this report, you are, I think, TPA. Is that?
That's correct.
Right? Can we look at page 3, please? And down to the key to plan. Now, there are various shorthand terms throughout this document, and one of them is owner, which is the identified owner of the corrective action, and the other is MTM, management team member to whom the CA owner reports. So there's a distinction between somebody who effectively takes ownership of the recommendation and the person that manages the relevant team or relevant person. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Could we scroll down? Is that possible? Over to the next page. So these are various recommendations. We see there 3.2, 3.3, I think 3.4 also were recommendations relating to various documentation that needed to be actioned. And you are there as the MTM, so there you're taking the management responsibility for those issues.
Yes.
And can we keep on scrolling to page 6, please? And that's 4.2.1. Thank you very much. And there you're the owner of this particular issue, is that right?
That's correct.
And can we just look at the left-hand side? It says the audit identified that Epos continues to be unstable. Pinnacle evidence illustrated the numbers of pinnacles raised since the 1998 task force and the rate of their being raised. The Epos Solutions report made specific recommendations to consider the redesign and rewrite of Epos, in part or in whole, to address the then known shortcomings. In light of the continued evidence of poor product quality, these recommendations should be reconsidered. So that's effectively what we saw in that audit from Jan Holmes, and you're down there as the owner of that particular recommendation.
The recommendation was to consider a rewrite.
Yes. And can we look on the right-hand side? Is it possible to blow up that right-hand side? There are certain things there that I think I'm going to need your help with because I don't quite understand. Let's see where we get to. 17th of November, this action falls within development but requires higher level drive, has links with CS and BD. Do you remember what that means at all?
CS, I think, is customer services, and BD is business development.
Thank you. MJBC to speak with TPA director. Is that
Mike Coombs.
Mike Coombs, thank you very much. 25th of November, work on AI 298 identified that majority of problems, approximately 80%, were to do with error and printer error handling. Daily meetings have been instigated. TPA of the view that while original code had not been good, it would be difficult to justify the case for rewriting now. So I think it's right to say that in November, towards the end of November, you were of the view that a rewrite wasn't your preference.
It was a very risky thing to do, and if the judgment was that 80% of the errors were down to error handling and printer error handling, then we should attack that part of the code and probably rewrite that.
Yes, I mean, that would still leave 20%, of course.
Yes, it would.
Yes. And there's an email issued by yourself, I think, and that says, we have not formally closed down the recommendation that we re-engineer the Epos application due to its inherent instability. Since this recommendation was made, a number of events/actions have taken place. We embarked upon a major maintenance exercise for LT2, which targeted several known stability issues. In parallel, we carried out a defensive testing activity, which identified a number of faults which were addressed. The intensive exercise designed to remove acceptance incident 298 resulted in many substantial improvements to the error handling, messaging, and printing aspects of this product. That's the 80% that we talked about just now. We finally introduced improved unit and link testing and more disciplined configuration control. Finally, the maintainability and enhanceability of the product has been proven by the speed and quality of the SIP16 and Epos reconciliation developments. We will, of course, continue to monitor the Pinnacle stack for the next few months, and if necessary, re-evaluate this decision. Would Jan please close this issue formally using the rationale described? So what you're doing there is asking Jan Holmes to close the recommendation because, in your view, it effectively didn't need to be written at that time.
At that stage, I was suggesting that the evidence was showing us that it was stabilising and that the number of problems we were experiencing was reducing, and I didn't believe that it justified a rewrite. But it's not my decision alone. That would have been discussed with Mike Coombs and the board in general, and not the board in general, the ICL Pathway Management Team.
And who would that be?
Well, that'd be Mike Coombs, John Bennett, and the other people in the room: Tony Oppenheim, Mike Bennett, all the people in the ICL Pathway Management Team.
Can we go back to the page itself? So you have the management team members there, but you're down as the owner there.
I was down as the owner. But that's not a decision I could have made alone.
If we keep on scrolling on this particular document, there are more tasks there, or more recommendations, but you'll see that your name is in the management level there rather than the owner. So that's, I think it's fair to say, the key corrective action or recommon that you were the owner of was that one about the Pinnacle, the
Oh,
Epos
yes,
system.
without doubt. Yes, there were others. There's one at the bottom of that page which was down to me.
Yes. Can we look at WITN 600104, please. This is the same report, but a bit later. It's version 2.0, and it's dated the 10th of May 2000. So it's 6 months later. And can we go to page 6 and do precisely what we did on the last document, which was scroll through? You'll see there 3.2, for example, by that stage had been closed. We can scroll to the next page. Those early documentation-related ones, I think they were all closed. And then it's page 9 where the 4.2.1 appears. And that's what we saw last time. But if we scroll over the page, it's been updated. Thank you very much. And I'm going to need your help with a bit of interpreting here, I think. If we could look at the right-hand side of the screen, perhaps we could blow that side up. 8th of December, JH, so that's Jan Holmes, requested statistics on fixes delivered to live from RM. Who was RM? Might that have been Royal Mail? I wasn't sure.
No. It could be release management.
Also informed yourself that requires agreement of Mr. Coombs before this can be closed.
Absolutely.
So Jan Holmes there is asking for statistics on fixes before he can be satisfied that it should be closed.
Yep.
And then we look at the 8th of December. Mr. Coombs confirmed that unless it may be release management statistics contradicted reports provided by PJ, is that Mr. Jerram?
Peter Jerram, yeah.
The recommendation could be closed. Nothing is closed in December, nothing is closed in January, February, March, and we're in April now, the 7th of April. There's again email to Mr. Coombs, yourself, and Mr. Jerram providing details of release management Epos fixes to live, asked for confirmation that matched PJ reports. If does, then we'll close. So was confirmation given before the 10th of May of the sort that Jan Holmes was requesting?
If Mike closed it, then yes.
Well, we'll see the basis on which it was closed, but it does seem like quite a few months have passed, and the kinds of statistics that were being asked for there weren't produced, or there seems to be some sort of issue, because we go through, as I say, December, January, February, March, April.
No, I don't think it's not. I don't think it's suggesting that. I think it's suggesting that through the observation period, while further testing was going on, that the statistics demonstrated that the product had stabilised and was no longer producing the kind of problems it was before. So it's a case of saying that Mike's saying that if I can see statistics from release management that support the recommendation, then I will authorise the action to be closed.
And it certainly seems as though throughout early 2000 at least, he wasn't getting those statistics. Would you agree with that?
There is an inference of that, but I can't recall that.
We're going to return to this document, but perhaps we can just go to FUJ 000-58190, please. This is the ICL Pathway Monthly Progress Report for February 2000. Is this a kind of document that you would have seen at the time?
I used to write one of the sections of it.
Can we look at page 5 of that report? Thank you very much. So rollout is on track by that stage. We've now exceeded 4,000 post offices and are achieving the targeted 300 plus implementations per week. This is a tremendous performance. So at that point, February 2000, quite rapid acceleration of the rollout. Can we look at page 6, please? There's a heading New Business. Now that acceptance has been achieved and national rollout and customer services are seen by post offices going well, there are positive engagements now starting on new business. So it seems as though there's movement towards focusing on new business by that stage. Would you agree with that?
That's what it implies, yes.
Can we look at page 24 of this report? And please do tell me if there's something that you recognise that you wrote. If this page 24, for example, is something that you wrote, then please do let us know.
My section is the one headed development.
Okay. So this is acceptance loose ends. Do I take it from that those are certain things that haven't yet been resolved?
It would appear that way, yeah.
Can I read to you that second bullet point? It says, we have dealt with queries from POCL concerning AI 376. That was the lack of data integrity AI. One formal letter has been responded to, attempting to avoid the conclusion that we had not found Epos reconciliation incidents that we should have found, or that we have not reported those we did find. In reality, CS are greatly hampered in spotting the incident because the reports have not had fixes implemented and report large amounts of do-nothing information. We have attended the release management forum and proposed some reordering of the fix backlog, but it will be at least until the first week of March before the situation improves. The impression that you get there is that despite the rollout going and progressing rapidly, there is some dispute about underreporting from ICL. Do you remember that, or is that a fair observation in relation to that paragraph?
CS is customer service, and what we were doing at this stage was moving from a development kind of project into a customer service project. So it was a transformation. This is what often happens in IT programs, that once they've gone through an intensive development phase, they have to move into a system support, service management kind of environment. To do that, you need completely different organizational structure, and you need different skills and such like. And Stephen Muckow, who was the service manager, this is his report, and it would appear to be he's reporting against the help desk and the flow from the help desk through, and how fixes are being identified. I was right at the end of the chain, if you like. So when you get the help desk, which was a mixture of experts on both POCL and ICL pathway, and that's where some of my team ended up moving towards second line and third line within that, and would also work on the help desk occasionally. So they were no longer reporting into me. They'd moved across into a service management environment. So what this is doing, it seems to be suggesting that Stephen at that point is not happy with that process.
But does it seem that in early 2000, there were some allegations from the post office that ICL pathway weren't reporting as many incidents as perhaps they should have?
I don't believe that to be true. We reported everything.
But do you remember an allegation of that sort?
No, I don't, actually.
And CS, customer service, are greatly hampered in spotting the incident. Were there issues in early 2000 with really spotting incidents amongst your team?
Well, that's written in a way. It says customer services are greatly hampered in spotting the incident, and I don't understand that statement. I genuinely don't understand it. I can only guess and speculate that it is to do with, it's saying spotting the incident. The incident would be reported to the help desk. So I think it could be saying that the team that was in place at the time was struggling to identify where the problem is.
Can we go back to WITN 046000104 and to page 10, please? Thank you very much. Sorry, could we go to one page before that? Over the page. Oh, sorry, other way. Perfect, thank you very much. So I put to you earlier about late 1999, early 2000s. It seems as though the inference, as you agree from that document, is that there's some sort of problem in producing the statistics that have been asked for by Jan Holmes, and set against what I've just shown you. I mean, would you accept that it looks as though there's some sort of issue going on in early 2000 about providing accurate information about the number of incidents?
Yeah, they should. There was. It would definitely imply that there was an issue there. I can't recall what the issue was. No, I can't.
And then the 10th of, there was a reminder on the 3rd of May, and then the 10th of May, you have this, and this is a response received from Mr. Coombs. As discussed, this should be closed. Effectively, as a management team, we have accepted the ongoing cost of maintenance rather than the cost of a rewrite. Rewrites of the product will only be considered if we need to reopen the code to introduce significant changes in functionality. We'll continue to monitor the code quality based on product defects as we progress through the final passes of testing and the introduction of the modified is it C14 or CI4? It's a fix of some sort.
It's a release of some kind,
Yes.
yeah.
Let's say CI4, code set into live usage in the network. PJ, can we make sure this is specifically covered in our reviews of the B and TC test cycles? And then it's closed on the 10th. So it says effectively as a management team you've decided. Who was the management team?
Well, the management team was the people in ICL Pathway. That would be people like Peter Jerram, myself, Mike Coombs, and Stephen Mucko and various other people.
Now, by referencing the management team there, by the sound of it, the decision of management might have been taken contrary to those lower down the chain. Would you accept that? I mean, were there, for example, people within the team who were really saying at that stage, we really need to rewrite this product?
There could be some programmers, yes. There was a difference of opinion, without doubt.
And that was a difference of opinion between management and those...
No, there was a difference of opinion within the technicians. So the problem I had as a manager is I was getting contradictory information. I was getting a view that was, from the Pinnacle viewpoint, I could see that the product was unstable. And when I'm trying to identify what the issue is and what we're going to do about it, and talking to the various people, there was two different views. There was those in the team that felt it should be rewritten, and those in the team that felt that we should focus our efforts in certain aspects of the product.
And do you think those who felt it should be rewritten were in the majority?
I don't know, but they were just equal on the people I spoke to.
I mean, the reference there to management team suggests, at least, that it was management who thought it shouldn't be, but perhaps those below thought it should
There were, as I said originally, there would have been people, programmers, who may have felt that it was the right thing to do.
Can we look at your witness statement? That's WITN 0419000100. Side by side if we can, but if we can't, then that's not a problem. It's page 12 of your witness statement, paragraph 26. Thank you. So it's about halfway down that paragraph. You say, The option was debated at length by senior members of the ICL pathway management and technical teams, and the outcome was that we should embark upon a major exercise to target the specific areas known to be the source of most, circa 80% of the issues, identified which were error handling and printing. If this approach was unsuccessful, then a rewrite should be the only option available. However, the product did become stable, and the number of outstanding defects did fall within the levels defined in the acceptance criteria. Now, it may be suggested that that is slightly inconsistent with what's being communicated by Mr. Coombs. And I'll run you through where those inconsistencies may or may not lie. You've said in your statement, for example, it was debated by members of management and technical teams. And as I say, Mr. Coombs seems to focus on the management team. Again, do you think it is possible there that it was the technical teams who were in favour of the rewrite and management who weren't?
No, the technical teams means the people in my development and design, architectural design development, who I had the most confidence in, and we would thrash looking at the facts and decide what was the best option forward. So they would comprise of people like Alan Ward, who was my chief architect. They would comprise of people like John Hunt, who was one of the consultants on the team, Steve Warwick, who was the expert in Epos, and Pete Jerram, who was the development manager at the time. So that's what I mean by the technical team, is that we would have pulled in people that we had confidence in, and we would thrash out what we thought was the best way forward.
And amongst those names that you've mentioned, were they all in favour of a rewrite?
No, none of them were.
And your explanation in the witness statement seems to focus on what we know as AI 298. That's the overall stability acceptance incident. Would you accept that there were other issues, such as cash account imbalances, whether caused by what we know as AI 376 or something else at that time, which were still occurring and still related to the Epos product?
That's right. What I'm implying in my witness statement is that, if you like, we were judged on acceptance. And acceptance was whether the product, the overall product, met the business requirements as stated in the functional specifications, the business requirements specifications, and whether it met the criteria for the number of defects and errors that were still available in the product. If we achieved that, which was, if I recall, was 0 A's and 10 B's and no restriction on C's at that point, then from that perspective, we have met the criteria on two fronts. Now, if the decision we'd made wasn't the right one, then it would have shown up in that, and we would have failed acceptance. So that's what I'm implying in my witness statement, is that we wouldn't have achieved acceptance.
So would you accept, and I think others such as Tony Oppenheim have said this, that there would still be some circumstances where it wouldn't be possible to identify what has gone wrong?
One of the biggest difficulties with the instability issues was in the 90s that some of you, forgive me, may recall in the 90s, if you had a PC, that actually it was very subjected to blue screens and lockups. I mean, nowadays you never see a blue screen, but Windows NT in the 90s, you would get a blue screen, and trying to track down what had caused that in such a complex system as Pathway was extremely difficult, because a lot of the blue screens we were experiencing were at the counter, frustrating the postmasters considerably, understandably, but trying to understand what was happening at the time, because the blue screen would then, you'd reboot it and it would go away. And as most of you know now, even the common solution to a printer or a PC or a laptop is just to switch it off and switch it back on again. But when you're in a distribution system, switching on and switching back on again, which is a reboot, we want to find out what the problem is. We have no way of seeing the counter. We can't get onto the counter to have a look at it, and we can't take what we used to call dumps or printouts of the store, the message store, to try and see what caused that issue. So that was a constant thorn for us to try, and we would get a lockup or a freeze, and all you could suggest to the people was that we will try and find, and we did find quite a few of them, and it was down to 2 or 3 very, very clever individuals that managed to track down what some of these were, and they were quite obscure. So that's what I'm referring to, is that the stability one was to do mainly with blue screens and freeze and lockups, and the AI to do with 376 was to do with balancing the cash account.
Absolutely. So your focus in that particular passage as well is on AI, what we know as AI 298. That's the overall stability.
It's on the stability one. Yeah.
But you clearly accept at that stage there were other issues, especially with the Epos product, that were continuing, even if, as you say, it may have been circa 80% that was the overall stability issue.
Yes, but during the period from there onward, we focused on pinnacles. I introduced during when these pinnacles were being raised and the problems on reconciliation and freezes and lockups were being identified, we had what we call morning prayers, and every morning at 8:30, all the top people in my team would meet, and we would go through the latest incidents and the ones that previous incidents, find out what progress we'd made on the ones that we'd identified previously, and any new ones overnight the previous day. And then we'd decide during that meeting the course of action, and then we'd meet the next day. We did that day after day after day for many weeks.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we're here this is May 2000. So, I mean...
This is closing down something in May 2000. It's not, and it's as a result of what's been going on. And what Michael's saying there is that there was no evidence to suggest that it shouldn't be closed.
And your evidence is that after closure, there were still a number of incidents still continuing, and you had dedicated...
No, that was before that.
So after May 2000, there weren't incidents?
No, there would still be incidents. There's always incidents in a system of that size, but they were being monitored through the help desk and down through the support channels.
But by May 2000, your focus had been on AI 298 in particular.
Well, 376 as well.
But 376 you would accept continuing?
We were looking at all issues identified by coming down through all pinnacles, all incidents that have been raised on the Epos product at that point, and we were focusing on every one of them. So we didn't leave these to one side, or every one that appeared like it looked like it was Epos, and quite often it wasn't Epos. It was either to do with the tip interface, or it was to do with the processes, or it was to do with reference data, or it was to do with migration of some kind. Just because it was identified, that was where the source of the problem existed. That didn't necessarily, that's where the source of the fix existed. So I would bring everybody into my office, and every morning, witnessed by senior Fujitsu test and diagnostics experts that came over from Japan and were allocated by Fujitsu, who sat in my meetings to watch me and decide whether they were happy with the process. So I was under a lot of scrutiny there, and I personally wanted to see and get this sorted out. It mattered an awful lot to me to get it sorted out.
So are you saying that throughout the year 2000, it was well known in Fujitsu, including people who came over from Japan, that there were these problems?
We've got a timescale problem here. May 2000 is at the end of that period, not the beginning. I'm talking about period prior to that, when we were doing model office testing, end-to-end testing, acceptance testing, and live trial.
So by May 2000, it all suddenly stopped?
No, Epos was not providing the kind of problems that would justify rewriting the code. That's what Mike's saying.
So it wasn't providing sufficient problems to justify rewriting
Correct.
the code, but it was still providing problems.
Well, as were other parts of the system, yeah.
But you would accept that the Epos was still an issue post-May 2000?
Well, it depends on what you mean by an issue. There were problems, defects, which were being dealt with in a normal support way.
I mean, given all the information that you received over those 2 years, so starting from that Holmes-McDonnell report in 98 and then the report in 99 and the issues in early 2000, didn't you think that it might have been the time to start thinking about rewriting Epos?
I did several times think about it, and I was persuaded by the technicians working on the product that they felt that they could sort it out.
Were there any particular technicians who you felt persuaded you?
Steve Warwick in particular, because he knew the product better than anybody else.
Let's look at FUJ 000-79333, please. Now, this at the top email and the top two emails are emails of the 10th of May 2000 in the evening, 6:36, 6:28 in the evening of the 10th of May. So it looks certainly from the time that was after the issue had been closed. Would you agree with that? Do you remember, was there a meeting in the daytime or discussions in the daytime on the 10th to close the recommendation?
I can't recall, but this seems to be after that, yeah.
Now, let's look at that second email on the screen. So this is an email from you. In fact, can we go over the page? We'll start with the original request. So this is actually before the closure. So this starts in April, 27th of April. Do you remember who Pat Lywood was at all?
No.
No. So these are current issues on...
Oh, I think Pat Lywood was someone that was it was in the customer services support line.
And it says current issues on, and that's, I think, either C14 or CI4 Epos. And can we look at halfway down the screen, we can see their balancing process overheads. After migration to CI4, a new process is introduced to the cash account process. Every office will be required to declare non-value stock. If the office fails to do this process, he will not be able to balance or complete the cash account. And then it says that Paul Westfield and I will ensure that this is included in the backfill training provided to the existing offices. And then further down, there's reference to risk of code regression. That's another heading. There may be fixes that have been produced and delivered into CI3 that have been missed from CI4. I will take this up with Dave Royal and ask for assurance that all clone pinnacles have been tested. I will supply a list of the pinnacles that we have tested in the CI3R release. So that's the start of the chain. And then if we go to page 1, Stephen, is it Muckow or?
Muckow.
Muckow. That's at the bottom of the page, sorry. He sends you an email, again, on the 27th of April, so before the closure of the Epos issue. And he says, I'm particularly concerned with the risks of degraded counter and cash account performance and of code regression between CI3 and CI4. And then you respond in the email above that. And one thing that may become relevant in due course, Gareth Jenkins is copied into that email. And you say at 6:36 on the 10th of May, so presumably after the recommendation has been closed, Steve, I share your concerns regarding counter performance and code regression. To that end, we're focusing on those areas of functionality where we appear to be experiencing performance degradation and attempting to establish where the problem lies. I've been personally aware of these problems for several weeks and would not expect CS to authorize CI4 unless these issues were resolved. I've raised the issue of extra work during the weekly balancing with Mike, who will be discussing it with Dave Smith. This has been introduced by POCL to support LFS. I cannot give you a 100% guarantee that code regression will not occur at CI4 because by its very nature, it's not fully automated and will never be. However, our end-to-end processes are designed to reduce the possibility of this occurring to an absolute minimum, and I've recently requested a reconciliation where it is possible to do so. you've said there that there's a problem that you've been aware of for several weeks, and you cannot give 100% guarantee that code regression won't occur. Keep it to a minimum. Code regression, that's similar to code decay, is it? But it means, I think, that by fixing one thing, it could break something else that was working before.
It's not decay, no. Code regression, we used to have a testing sequence called regression testing. And whenever you put a fix into a product of any kind, you will subject it to regression testing to see that you haven't undermined or introduced another problem or affected something you'd already done. Hence the reason it's called regression testing, to ensure that you have not regressed the problem. So the problem is that when you're fixing faults, you cannot guarantee that you haven't caused a regression, because it's technically, if a programmer puts a fix in, he does it, he tests it to his ability, it then goes into regression testing, and regression testing says it's okay. It then goes into the live environment, and because you've assembled far more of the system at that point, there's so many more moving parts, then another error may crop up. So some regression that may well happen. And that is the case with every IT system I'm aware of.
Is it a bit like whack-a-mole, where one problem crops up, you try and fix it, and then something else pops up somewhere else? But
you may have inadvertently, by fixing the problem, you may have reintroduced something else, or you may have knocked on to some other part of the program that the programmer didn't realise.
Now, that's as I say, the evening that recommendation about Epos was closed. I mean, there may be some people asking, how could you close that recommendation, knowing all that is contained within that email?
This is to do with performance. This is to do with performance degradation. This is not to do with Epos degradation. It's another issue. What's happening is that we're noticing that the time it's taking on the counter performance on its response times and the time it's taking to do the cache account is degrading. And that is a performance issue. What we don't know, and we're trying to find out what's causing that. So that's why I was aware of it, is because I'd been aware that it was happening, but we were finding it extremely difficult to reproduce it in the laboratories.
I mean, if we look at the subject, it's C14 was a particular fix on Epos, so it was a problem that was fundamentally on Epos.
It was on Epos, but it was a performance element. What says is regarding counter performance and code regression. So was there something happening and where the code was regressing, which was causing the performance to get worse? So that's the question that I couldn't guarantee, and what Steve is asking the question.
And presumably those issues could have real life implications for those who are trying to balance.
Yes. I mean, I was very concerned that it was taking longer to do the account balancing at the end of the day than it should.
I mean, do you think that these kinds of issues should have been raised with Jan Holmes before closing that incident on that day? We didn't have any pinnacles. It was something that I was aware of, that what appeared to be happening. There was no proof, there was no evidence. All that we were getting was a feeling that the counter seemed to be degrading in performance while we were going through this work. And this is Steve making the same point. So I get where you're coming from, but we would have seen these as two different issues. In hindsight, maybe I can accept the point you're making, is that maybe the fact that these were starting to occur, we should have perhaps raised them during that. But we weren't. At the time that Jan wrote the original report and the time that Mike, we had no evidence that it was. I'm not being very clear here. What I'm trying to say is we didn't know what was causing the problem, and we didn't know at what extent the problem was either. Do you think that might have been something to tell Jan Holmes?
The reason I'm hesitating is that I think you're probably right. in hindsight, you're probably right. But the counter performance and the time it was taking to do something, we used to look at in a different way. We didn't. It could have been for a variety of reasons. It may not have been anything to do with the Epos product. It may have been to do with the way that the counter was booting in the morning. It could have been all sorts of things that may have been causing that to happen. So it wouldn't necessarily be pointing at Epos.
But you're talking there of code regression as well as counter performance. So
Yes, but that could be code regression anywhere in the counter. He's saying Epos, and Steve wasn't a technical guy. So it's terminology being used there. I've responded in saying, because I know what he's referring to, that it was to do with counter performance and potential code regression. But that's not necessarily just Epos.
one of your solutions to the Epos problem, though, was to implement fixes along the way rather than rewriting. So presumably every fix, there's potential for code regression.
Yeah, see, I know that we found out what was causing this, and it wasn't Epos. So that's the point I'm trying to make, is there's several elements. If you may have already seen, if you've seen a technical environment description of the system, there are several elements that sit within the counter. And one of the issues in the 90s was trying to get any system to boot up with all the massive software that had to initialize in there. And things like the counter slowing down could have been, as I said, it could have been to do with any product within the counter that was causing that, not necessarily Epos. And we did resolve this problem. As far as I can remember, we did resolve the problem.
Well, I want to take you to a pinnacle. It will only take 10 to 15 minutes. Would you like to break now, or can we break after I've taken you to that? Because that's the end of my questioning on Epos issue.
We can carry on.
Thank you very much. Can we look at FUJ 000-67416, please? In fact, it's a peak rather than a pinnacle. For those who have been following this inquiry, this also appears within the expert report at page 157. Now, I'm going to need your help quite a lot with this because it's not very easy to understand. But can we look at the 16th of May? So the first entry, this is 6 days after that Epos issue was closed. It says the host-generated cash account line comparisons report dated 15th of May, where Post Office 169207 has a difference in the receipts and payments total for CAP, that's cash accounting period 06. Please investigate. Now, the third entry there, could we just scroll down slightly? So it's the 19th of May. Actually, it's the 5th entry, sorry. This office has had big problems with its receipts and payments. Cash account period 5, 6, and 7 did not match. The differences are, and it gives a difference. The office has already reported problems balancing, which are being investigated by development. So big problems being identified, and I think if you look at 2 entries down, there's another report on the 19th of May, receipts and payments issue in CAP 7. Can we go to the 24th of May? That's over the page, page 2. So it says there, the cause of the problems in all 3 cash accounting periods at this outlet was the fact that stock unit DD's rollover records from CAP 5 to CAP 6 represented a nil balance. The total stock holding was nil. No receipts or payments transactions were recorded, despite the fact that the stock unit had been trading normally during this period. The issue was raised in Pinnacle 43811 and is still under investigation within the Epos development team. Was that your team, the Epos development
No,
team?
not at that stage. As I said to you, it had moved over into a support environment, and I wasn't responsible for the team at that point.
But there was a specific team dealing with problems with Epos on the 24th of May.
Yes.
And they dealt with issues to do with
Absolutely.
balancing issues.
Absolutely.
Can we look at the entry on the 30th of May? That's one entry down. There's more information there about further investigation. I'm not going to read that out. Perhaps if you could just take a short period just to have a quick look at what it says there. And then if we go down to the bottom of the page, there's an entry of the 4th of July. And can we just scroll over to the next page? At the top of the next page seems to be an explanation. This problem is the same that already resolved in Pinnacles 37884 and 37663, namely that of data server not tree building and populating correctly. A diagnostic has been put into data server to detect any such problems. That's the explanation. Can we look at the 12th of July? Now, this is where it becomes difficult to understand, and I'm going to need your help if you're able to. On page 4, the entries from the 12th of July. Could I ask you just to read to yourself those entries briefly? And if you're able, if we could carry on scrolling perhaps, because there's another entry on the 12th of July at 12:29. Can I ask you to read that final entry?
Right. Okay.
I mean, can you help us? I mean, it seems as though what they're trying to do is work out how to reproduce the cash account as it should have been prior to an error. Is that?
That's true.
Yes.
But they've also believed that they understand what has caused the problem, which is pretty obscure.
Yes. And can we have a look at the next page, the 8th of August? Halfway down the page, 2:35 in the afternoon on the 8th of August. I've spoken to Martin McConnell, who advised call can be routed to Epos. That's again, that Epos team, is it?
I don't know what SP stands for, because at that point, as I said, it's not within my chain.
Then can we go over the page to the 13th of September, please? And there are two entries on the 13th. If that first one can be at the top, perfect. Thank you very much. Again, I'm going to ask you to read those to yourself. I mean, I'll read just very briefly the first one. It says, it proved very difficult to resurrect the cash account data for week 5. Steve Warwick's analysis tool showed that not only was stock unit DD corrupt, but also stock unit XXX Epos nodes were missing and had to be resurrected. If I could ask you just to have a quick look at that, and then also the one below that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the one below, sorry.
Yes.
Are you able to briefly describe what you think is going on there?
It would appear that they have come to the conclusion that something had kicked in on archiving from the counter, which caused the problem. And that's pretty, as I said before, that's obscure for that to have happened. And as a result of that, it's caused this impact. And then it would appear that that they're struggling to be able to reproduce the cash accounts and the figures that would balance them off, and they're suggesting a way in which they can move forward on it.
And can we go to the final entry on that page, and it goes over the page? So this is 14th of September 2000. I'll read this one. This is an entry that says, "Thanks for all the effort. For the time being, I've agreed that reconstructed cash accounts will not be needed all the time, but only by special request of POCL. I've already issued the final BIM report. As such, please close this call and hope for the best with a CI4 code, which should make this type of incident very rare." Here we are in September of 2000, and the approach is, let's hope for the best. Is hope for the best, is that what you decided to do in terms of the rewrite of Epos?
I was not responsible for this.
No, but hope for the best. Was that the kind of attitude that was taken in respect of the Epos product back in May? Hope for the best, hopefully it'll be very rare.
No. The data that had been received prior to May, which resulted in Mike suggesting that it should be closed, didn't suggest it. Suggested that we had resolved the issue. There were still going to be problems because of the sheer nature and scale and complexity of the project. But the original issue, which was to do with error handler, printer handling, and cash account balancing, we believed that in the majority of instances, 99% of the time, we had managed to sort it. That's what Mike was referring to. We knew, well, we didn't know, but as a result of this, which I had no involvement with whatsoever, but a very obscure instance of where an archiving program kicked in, which caused this problem. It shouldn't do, but it did. And it seems to be something to do between Riposte and the archiving suite that caused this. And these are the kind of problems you get in large systems. And the idea is to try and track it down. It would appear that what they're saying is this shouldn't happen, and it may happen again, but if it does, it would be another pinnacle. We would have to look straight into it straight away if it happened, is what they're saying. It's not, hope for the best is it should sort itself out in C14 is what he's suggesting. It's not terminology I would have used, but...
it should sort itself out is in fact a phrase that we've heard quite a lot of, especially during the human impact stages. Was the general feeling that things will sort themselves out?
No. Okay, my terminology wasn't very helpful there, but what I'm trying to say is I wasn't responsible for C14 or C4. I don't know what it was. I'm sorry, so I can't be helpful on that. I don't know what it involved. I don't know what was in there. There may have been a lot of fixes put in there.
Can we look, and this is the final thing before the break, FUJ 000-80690. It's the first document that I took you today. And can we look at page 7, please? And the top of page 7. So in 1998, you were being told that there were hundreds of fixes, code decay, the system was unstable, no guarantee it won't adversely affect another part of the system. I mean, looking back at that paragraph and knowing what you know now, do you think you should have agreed to rewrite Epos back in 1998 or 1999?
The best advice I was getting at the time was that if we were to rewrite, did we have the people to do it? Did we have the expertise to do it? And by doing so, would we run the risk of just creating another problem? Because one of the reasons why this got into this situation is that we were forced to do rapid application development. And by doing that, you haven't got a functional specification. You've got what we call, you're talking to people and you're trying to get Epos to sit POCL people to sit alongside you. And the problem was that we had people who were working in that environment that weren't very professional and weren't very good at their job. So I was convinced by the people that were giving me the evidence that it was a certain part of the Epos product that was responsible for a very large percentage. We say 80%, but it could have been 90%. I was measuring whether that was a good decision by the number and type of pinnacles that we were getting come the live trial. And that's how I measured personally whether that was the right decision to do. If the product had been as bad and that Steve, for example, and others had been wrong, then we would never have got to that stage. We would never have got to the acceptance situation and number of pinnacles. We would have had a product that we would have had to have rewritten.
Do you think that you listened enough to the members of the team who were urging a rewrite?
The reason I'm hesitating is that I believed I did. I believed to their argument. I listened to their argument, and so did some of the people who were more technical than I was. I believed that everybody was given an opportunity to give their view of what should happen. They believed that we should rewrite it, and there were other people that thought that we shouldn't.
Once you had taken the decision not to rewrite, did you sideline those who were urging a rewrite?
Not as far as I'm aware. No, I don't believe so.
And by May 2000, so that was the date when the recommendation was finally closed, presumably that was far too late then to start thinking about a rewrite, given the number of post offices that already had the system in place.
No, it wasn't too late. I mean, you could rewrite a product over a period of time to match the user interface that the postmasters were used to. You could replicate that functionality in parallel and then release it at a later date if you felt that was the right thing to do.
And at no point did you feel that that was the right thing to do?
Not during my time. I'd have sufficient evidence to suggest that was the right thing to do. The ones that you pointed out that were picked up later were very obscure situations, and there was nothing there to suggest it was a rewrite.
Thank you. So I think that's an appropriate time for a 10-minute break.
Yes, fine. What time shall we resume?
I think we can come back at midday.
Midday.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a break, Mr. Austin, and don't talk about your evidence. So I'm sure you won't think of it anyway.
Thank you.
So we can see you now.
Good.
Thank you very much. Mr. Austin, I only have about 15 more minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Mr. Steen and Mr. Henry to ask you a few further questions. Briefly, while we're on Epos, I want to ask you about RAD, Rapid Application Development. We know from a report that was sent to the Post Office by project mentors, the reference there is POL 38829, but we don't need to bring the document up. The pathway started with rapid application development methodology, but that appears to have been discontinued after a staff member left the project. Do you know anything about that at all?
Yes. Yes, it was not proving to be very successful. Not only was one of the staff members left, but also it did depend, it was very dependent on POCL providing experts that could define their requirement. And that was very time consuming for POCL, and POCL didn't feel that they had enough people to fulfill that role. So we decided to reverse engineer and produce a document that then could be used to use a traditional waterfall approach.
So I was going to ask, an advantage of RAD is that it can get something working as quickly as possible, but it relies on later iterating and replacing.
Absolutely, and that it was also obvious that POCL as a customer were not comfortable with that, because it meant that it wouldn't be fully functional, so you'd be putting out a series of releases over a period of time, and they wanted a fully functional system, and RAD was not the right way to do that.
And I think the basic prototype framework in an RAD isn't used ultimately in the main build of the system. Is that right?
Well, nowadays it is, but I can't recall, because RAD at that time was quite an immature methodology. I was uncomfortable with it as an individual, as a development person, but I felt that it was still immature, and I didn't really understand how you got from A to B and how you got a system that represented what the user wanted. I understood the mechanics, but I didn't understand how you achieved a product that would deliver to the customers what they wanted.
Am I right to infer from some of your earlier evidence that you didn't have some faith in some of the technical members of the team?
That's how it, when I saw, after requesting the task force, I was extremely disappointed and upset that we had ended up with a product which on the face of it looked like it was pretty bad. So yeah, I was then put into a very, very difficult position, because going back to what we said earlier, it's easy to say rewrite the product. That's the easy option, because you can just stand back and say rewrite it. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up with something that's better. It just means that you've said that's the right thing to do. Actually trying to get a product and fix it and make sure that it's stable, and I genuinely believe that we had done that. And so I think that I was comfortable that the fact that we had taken that approach and we succeeded in getting the product. It would have been a very rocky ride, but we had achieved that objective, I believe, genuinely at the time.
So what had happened to that original RAD product?
Well, that RAD product was then enhanced. It was quite some way off what the functional requirement was needed to be. So we took it on from that viewpoint onwards and used it internally within the team.
Did you have a final signed-off design?
Yes, in the end, yes. We had to, as I said, reverse engineer, and we had to get some business requirements that were signed off by POCL. And a design that was signed off by POCL.
And I want to ask you about Post Office's awareness of various issues. You've said at paragraph 32 of your witness statement that POCL were made aware of every defect in the ICL Pathways solution.
As far as I was aware, they were.
Now, when you say defect, do you mean acceptance incident, or do you mean more than that?
No, I mean more than that. Every pinnacle that we were going through that we'd received, my understanding was, and I have no reason to think otherwise, is that we went through every one with POCL representatives.
So every pinnacle was...
Except for the Cs, a lot of the Cs, but even some of those we went through as well. Because every one, the category had to be agreed.
The pinnacles or the acceptance issues? I mean, pinnacles are every incident.
Yes, but if it's agreed that it's an error, then the category of that error needs to be agreed with POCL.
So, I mean, the kind of document that we saw, the peak, was your impression that those were being seen by POCL?
Well, There were POCL people that were represented within the help desk, is my understanding.
So it was through the help desk that you understood POCL obtained their information on problems with the system?
Well, yeah, being raised by the postmasters, and any incident, and by POCL, any incident raised by POCL, whether it be the postmasters or the managers elsewhere within POCL, would come and be raised as a pinnacle through the help desk.
Was there some sort of policy in place between POCL and ICL Pathway as to what level of information should be formally shared or informally shared?
I'm not sure.
Did you have any concerns about the sharing of information with POCL?
In the early days, yes, because it was a PFI, and therefore we had our solution, and therefore we were there to deliver the solution in line with the requirements. So we wouldn't necessarily share that information at that point.
I'll ask you about that stage shortly, but in terms of when it was all up and running, it was your belief that POCL had the level of detail that was contained in, for example, the pinnacles.
Yeah, yes, that was my understanding, yeah. I had no worries about them seeing the breakdown, the help desk and the comments, and I believe that POCL were involved in that process.
And what about the other way around? You've said that Pathway wasn't aware of POCL's own systems.
No, not at all.
And did that cause you difficulty?
Well, I wouldn't say it caused me difficulty. It was a bit like that if we had a problem with the tip interface, we didn't know whether there were any issues with tip that was causing that. We could see whether it was our side, we could see what tip was saying, and we would have to investigate, and quite often we would find that it was an error with tip. The same would apply to CAP in the benefits agency, that we could see through the interface that there was an issue. We didn't know what the issue was, we just see we were having problems with the interface.
I mean, you were designing an end-to-end product, so presumably that was pretty crucial.
Agreed.
And where did that failure lie then?
With the customers.
And did you ask?
Many times.
And what was their response?
They didn't feel that it was appropriate.
Let's look at the invitation to tender. Your role in the procurement process, I think you've said in your statement, was to evaluate the system's requirements in the invitation to tender to determine the resources that were required. Is that right?
That's correct.
Part of that was presumably working out how that end-to-end system could be achieved.
Yes. So I would have to look at the business requirements as defined in the ITT, and again, it was a PFI, so we'd already developed a solution, or in the process of developing a solution to meet those business requirements. And so my task was to make sure that the product that we had, the solution that Pathway had, would be delivered within that time. That was what my job was.
We've seen, and I'll give the reference, but we don't need to bring it up on screen, it's POL 000311117. Keith Todd produced a position paper in 1998 which said that Pockle couldn't reasonably have believed that the post office's premises were fit for automation. Was that your view?
Yes.
Wasn't
It's
it
not just my view, but it was a view that I shared.
And wasn't it part of your job at that stage, that invitation to tender stage, to check things like that?
Well, that's how we found out. It's by going in and then with the implementation to go into the post offices and do the surveys. And it was as a result of doing the surveys that we found that out.
Wouldn't it have been obvious from quite an early stage in the 1990s that many post offices branches wouldn't have had even computers?
No, it wasn't that. It was to do with things like PowerPoints. It was to do with desks that were suitable. It was to do with all the aspects of... As far as the surveys were showing that a lot of the premises were not fit to be able to automate in the state they were in, and required quite a lot of work in order to make them such.
So some blame has been placed on the post office for that, but it sounds as though you, ICL, were in fact carrying out your own investigations as to the state of fitness?
Well, we had to do surveys. That was part of, because if there was any additional work to be done in the post office, we were obliged to do it. So we went in the survey, and then we commissioned the work that was necessary.
And was that before the agreements had been signed with the post office?
No, that was after.
So wouldn't it have made sense to do them before?
You weren't allowed to.
And were you involved in preparing readiness before the contracts were signed and establishing what requirements might be required?
We had no reason to suspect that where the ITT wanted the system developed would be capable of accepting that. We didn't find out until after the award of contract, when we started to commit resources to the surveys. And then the surveys were showing that quite a few of the premises needed a lot of work doing to them.
Were surveys really, I mean, couldn't you have looked at some post offices yourselves before signing the contract? And
Well, we did, but there were 19,500 of them. So you could only do a snapshot if you were allowed to do so.
and did you do a snapshot?
We didn't. No. As far as I know, we didn't, but I can't recall.
And why not?
I'm pretty sure we weren't allowed to.
Could they have prevented you from going into post
No, they
offices?
couldn't have done, but they wouldn't have been very happy if we'd have gone down there. We would have to have sought permission from POCL to do that.
Keith Todd said that there would have been a view taken of the suitability of the post offices, and he referred repeatedly to a full-time team that ICL had. Were you part of that team?
Well, the implementation team would have been the team that was looking at that, yeah.
And who was head of that team?
I can't recall his name because they changed it 2 or 3 times.
At that stage, were you a senior member of that team?
I was the program manager of which that team was part.
Did you give thought at that stage to the fact that many post offices would use a telephone line connection?
Yeah, that wasn't. If that was the case, we knew that wouldn't work. We had to find alternative solutions to that.
So did you foresee issues with ordinary phone lines being used, such as interference, etc.?
Absolutely.
And did you raise those?
Yes, we did. Yes, we had to come up with different solutions for those post offices where that was the case.
Can you tell us a little bit, just what you recall of consideration being given to those kinds of issues at an early stage?
Well, we had to come up with a satellite option. We had to come up with we had to get ISDN lines into those post offices, and we were given the impression by BT that we could get ISDN lines into any of the locations we needed to. It only was much later on that we found that BT was struggling to do that.
And were you concerned about those that didn't have ISDN?
Absolutely,
lines?
yes, and we had to find a way of trying to automate them.
Because what kind of problems would it cause if they weren't?
Well, the connection wouldn't be a good one. It just wasn't suitable for a distributed IT system.
Peter Copping told us that ICL had told PA Consulting that they had seriously underestimated the amount of work that was involved. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Some witnesses have said that training was also underestimated by ICL. Is that something you would agree with?
I would.
And again, I mean, training was something that presumably you were considering at that invitation to tender stage.
Yes, it was.
And what steps did you take at the invitation to tender and procurement stage to consider the level of training that was required?
Well, we put forward our training. One of the issues that we had with training was that, and it remained a personal problem, even though I wasn't responsible for it in the latter part of the programme. But I couldn't see how you could roll out a system at the pace that we were rolling it out, and also train people that had such a wide-ranging capability. And I could appreciate that some of the postmasters and postmistresses would be horrified by the implementation of an IT system, especially that one day you're manual and the next day you're fully automated. And I know that we looked at training these people for a long period of time to give them as much information as we could. But the issue was that by the time they were scheduled to be rolled out, they may have forgotten it, which is quite reasonable. So we had to bring the training so that it got very close to their implementation within a week or two, as my understanding, because I wasn't really into it, responsible for it, in order to overcome that issue. But there was still the problem of basic training of IT, never mind the system, which was quite sophisticated in what it did. And so how that was overcome, and whether it actually was overcome, I don't know.
Do you think that training was underestimated at the invitation to tender and procurement stages by ICL?
Yes.
You've said in your statement to paragraph 5 that DSS and the Post Office were blissfully unaware of how unrealistic the timetable was.
Well, they put an indicative time frame, and the only way that could be met was if the solution that we'd got and we had defined, and we wrote it up and we put it in a fully functional specification and said that's the system that we're going to deliver in that time frame. At that time, there were 280-something agreements to agree, and we believed that CAPS was ready to go. And on that basis, we demonstrated what our system was capable of doing, and we defined it in a functional requirement. What transpired was that that functional requirement was never approved by BA or POCL.
It's been alleged that you obstructed the PDA in getting hold of certain information. It's been said that you had said that the contract prevented you from providing them with certain information.
Well, that was the PFI. I mean, I was, if you like, not instructed, but certainly advised by my peers and by my managers and seniors that a PFA contract meant that we were to be left to develop the system. That was our risk, our responsibility, and whether we were successful or not would be proved by acceptance.
And you've said at paragraph 10 of your statement that DSS and POCL were not ready managerially or technically. Why do you think that?
Because they couldn't answer the questions we were asking. So if they'd been ready technically, they knew that we were interfacing with their systems. So they should have people in place ready to front those questions and answer them. And if we were having difficulties in saying, we needed to define an interface specification between ourselves and several other systems that we were interfacing with. With the ones with TIP and the ones with CAP, we never got that specification to the level of detail that we needed. And when we had issues, we didn't have people that could help us to resolve them.
Do you think it would have helped to have shared more information with the Post Office?
That was not in the nature of the contract with respect. When you're carrying the risk, then the customer's taking a view that they wish to transfer the risk to a supplier, and that supplier then defines the system in the way they want to define it. And therefore, it's not a waterfall approach, it's not a standard contract. You needed a fully functional requirement in order to do that.
It may not have been part of the contract, but knowing now what we know, presumably more information sharing at an earlier stage would have been beneficial, wouldn't it?
Whether I believed it or not, it's not the nature of the contract, and I did have to adhere to my peers in that line. It was not something that I could choose to do.
Finally, you've also spoken about tensions between the DSS and Post Office. Where were you getting that information from, and how did that impact on the work that you were doing?
It was in meetings where both parties were present, and in memos and letters, if you like, in terms of emails and such. You could detect that there was a difference in their objectives, and I suspected that was because the benefits agency were looking for alternative ways other than the Post Office for solving their problems. And I think the Post Office were aware that was a possibility.
And how did that impact the work that was going on at ICL?
It's at my level, it probably didn't. It meant that I was being pushed in a certain direction by BA, if you like, as a senior partner, even though that may not have been in the best interests of POCL. And I had to try and balance the two, because as far as I was concerned, I'm there to try and satisfy both parties.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. I'm going to hand over now to Mr. Steen and Mr. Henry. Sir, do you have any questions before I do that?
No, thank you.
Mr. Austin, I've got a number of questions for you that relates to the operation of the system and the startup for it. My name is Sam Steen. I represent a large number of sub-postmasters, mistresses and managers. You would ask a number of questions by Mr. Blake that touched on the question of whether the branch offices were going to be ready for automation. Forgive me for perhaps being rather direct about this. Wasn't it blindingly obvious that some rural branch offices would be totally incapable of automation from the beginning of all of this?
Not to the extent that they were.
Well, have you ever been to a countryside branch post office in your entire life before you started working on this project?
Well, they have a counter, don't they?
Yes, but did you ever actually think about what the implications were of small rural places that are going to need to go from paper-based into automated base?
Absolutely.
Right. So why was that not brought into the thinking in relation to this project?
Well, it was, as far as I was concerned. It was a major issue.
There appears to have been surprise from ICL that POCL weren't aware of the possible demands of automation. If you were aware of it and you were not surprised by it, and this was a matter that was concerning you, why didn't you tell them to start off with?
We did.
Right. So you're saying that you pointed out that some of these offices were not going to be suitable, and you're saying that POCL just didn't listen.
No,
Is that right?
sorry, I'm saying training. I thought you were on training.
No, I was asking about automation. I thought that was clear. Well, what's the answer? Are you saying that you were perfectly aware of potential problems with branch offices, but you didn't bring it to the attention of POCL? Or are you
yes,
saying...
we did. Yes, we
right.
did.
So was that before contract was signed or after contract was signed?
After contract was
Right. Why not before?
because we weren't given the opportunity to do that, as far as I can recall. And I have to say, we may well have done. I can't recall that. I have to be honest.
This is a major issue, Mr. Austin, isn't it? The question of trying to put automation into small branch offices in the middle of the countryside. A major issue and a potential problem, yes?
Yes.
Later on, it costs, we think, something like 40 million to fix the problem, yes?
Yes.
Why didn't your company point this out and say, look, it's going to be obvious that this is going to be difficult?
We may well have done, but it wouldn't have been for me to have done that. I can't recall, to be honest. I'm sorry, I can't recall.
You've mentioned to Mr. Blake the question of the difficulties sometimes with the telephone line and then the other types of lines that might be required to assist with automation, yes?
Yes.
Now, as we understand it, if the branch computer goes offline within the Horizon system, there then needs to be a reconciliation between the central servers and the branch computer so
Yes.
that essentially they match. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right, so that this becomes vaguely comprehensible for everyone. That means that one part of the system must overwrite the other so that there's consistency of information between the two. Is that correct?
When the system comes back, the counter comes back, it can be replicated from the centre. So it can be brought back up to where it was when it failed.
Right. So what happens is that if the system goes offline, and it could go offline because it's been turned off, correct?
Yes.
Could go offline because environmental factors have caused an interruption in power supply.
Yes.
Could go offline because of problems with the cabling or something similar, yes?
Yes.
Right, so a variety of reasons could cause it to go offline, right? Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily, when it does get back in contact, that the two parts of the system are going to have the same information by that point, does it?
Not necessarily, but it was designed to do so.
Right. And in fact, it was designed, as we understand it, so that the computer within the branch could, even if it was offline, continue to provide service to customers. Is that correct?
If it was up and running, yes.
If it was up and running. So despite the fact that it may not still be connected to the Horizon main system, it can still provide customer support. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. So when back online, the plan was that the systems would then reconcile one to the other.
Yes, the counter would reconcile back to the correspondence service, yes.
Right. For obvious reasons, so that actually, in the end, both sides of the system would end up with the same information about
Yes.
transactions.
Yes.
Correct. Right. How much of the code or the technical specification for the software for the Horizon system was available to you and your team?
Because you're referring to the Epos software that was responsible for keeping those message stores in. That we were not allowed to see the code.
Right. Were your team capable of rewriting the code if it was required?
Yes, if our team wouldn't have been, but we would have had to have commissioned someone to do so.
So in order to deal with any Epos system difficulties with communication and communication errors, you had to go to the Epos system people, is that right?
Yes, my chief architect would do that.
Right. What was the cost to the post office of doing so if you went back to Epos?
None, as far as I'm aware.
What about the cost to ICL? Was there a cost there?
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Financial
what the question.
Cost. Was there a financial cost?
In going back to
Epos?
To change something?
Yes, to get support or get the engineers to come through or to get the code people to come and fix something?
Yes.
Yes. Is that code still available now? So if we wanted to check the system code right now, go back in time to what was being used for what we call Horizon Legacy, is that available?
I can't tell you. It was lodged in escrow.
I'm going to ask you some questions about the original agreement, and that's going to require putting up on the screen FUJ 6071, and you should have on your screen, Mr. Austin, the first page of that. I'm very grateful, Frankie. As you can see, Mr. Austin, this is just a reminder. This is Post Office Counters Limited and ICL Pathway Limited, the Information Technology Services Agreement for bringing technology to post offices. And this is the codified agreement. This is dated, as we understand it from the system, in mid-1999. Okay, so this is the basic agreement between the parties. All right? Now, I'm going to take you to a particular part of this, if I may, please. Can we go to page 90? Thank you very much, Frankie. Page 97 of 914 on the relativity system, sir, for your reference. I'm going to read out this particular section, Mr. Austin, so that you've got a moment to think about what it says here and therefore, from your point of view, what it means. So this is under the heading Prosecution Support. The contractor shall ensure that all relevant information provided by the POCL service infrastructure at the request of POCL shall be evidentially admissible and capable of certification in accordance with the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 and the Police and Criminal Evidence in Northern Ireland Order 1989 and equivalent legislation covering Scotland. At the next paragraph, at 4.1.9, at the direction of POCL, audit trail and other information necessary to support live investigations and prosecutions shall be retained for the duration of the investigation and prosecution, irrespective of the normal retention period of that information. So we can see that the heading for all of this is prosecution support. And then between paragraphs 4.1.8 and 4.1.9 is basically saying that information's got to be provided to the post office at the request of the post office, and it has to have certain evidentially admissible requirements. And then the other part is basically saying that, well, you need to keep the information so it's available. Just help us a little bit, please, with your understanding of that. What was your understanding of what would be evidentially admissible and capable of certification in accordance with the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 at the time? I'm not able to say that because that wouldn't have been my responsibility, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to know what that would be required. That would be one of my colleagues in the audit department there that would have, Martin Bennett and Jan would have liaised with the audit people within POCL to determine exactly the nature of what they required. Who within ICL was responsible for making sure that ICL was capable of fulfilling these prosecution support requirements? Martin Bennett, in my opinion. Martin Bennett. Help us, please, whether you're aware that ICL sought or did not seek an opinion from an experienced criminal lawyer as to what this all means. I can't. Again, are you referring that to Martin Bennett? I am, yes, because I wasn't responsible for that aspect. Martin would have come to me and said, this is what we need to do, as he did when we produced the audit trail capability. Right. Well, let's just deal with this a little bit more. What systems were you aware of that were put in place so that ICL could fulfil this requirement? A policy, guidance, protocol document?
I wasn't requested to do that.
Well,
I was requested to put in an audit system, which we did, which was to enable POCL to audit the system at various points throughout, from the correspondence server right through to the MIS, the back office system.
well, audit's not the same, is it? It's not the same as providing information which is evidentially admissible and capable of certification.
That never came across my desk.
Well, then why are you referring to audits?
Because the next sentence which you refer to, which is direction of POCL's audit trail.
Right, all right. But what protocols or systems were put in place for the first part, 4.1, 4.8? Do you know?
No, I don't.
No. Your job, as we understand it, if I recall from your statement, is that this is meant to be dealing with the implementation of the system, getting it up and running, getting it going to the acceptance requirements, yes?
Yes.
Right.
And to deliver to a business requirement specification that's produced and signed off by POCL.
Well,
that was never anything that I ever saw.
Well, this is part of their business requirements, Mr. Austin.
Not as I saw.
Why not?
I don't know.
Do you understand the importance?
Absolutely
of this
understand the import. I absolutely understand the importance, but nobody said or asked me or laid down in writing what was required in order to meet that requirement. That's in a contract with respect. That's not in a business requirement. I delivered things to a business requirement. That's a document that says these are our business functional requirements.
Right. So you delivered things to the, the acceptance criteria. That was what you were aiming.
No, a set of business requirements. The acceptance criteria was based on the business requirements.
Right. Okay. So the business requirements, as far as you can say and recall, did not include a reference to the prosecution support section.
No.
I see. If we just scroll down the page a little bit more, it says 4.3, training and training material. Frank, you've just go down to 4.3. Thank you very much. Now, there's a reference to the contractor shall prepare all training events and training material. Can you help from your recollection with what training events and training material was even considered to try and provide the prosecution support that we've just been looking at?
No, that was the responsibility of someone else.
Mr. Bennett?
No.
Who else?
I can't recall, but it was within Mike Coombs's area. He would be able to say who was responsible for doing that.
I see.
It was an training and implementation were not part of my responsibility.
And we can go one step down, please, Frankie, just a little bit further down that page. Yes, at 4.4.2, you see there that the contractor shall ensure all materials which are used for producing documentation relating to POCL services conform to relevant parts of POCL's environmental policy summary. Well, obviously, we'd all agree that that should be done. Do you recall whether there was any summaries or policies that were provided to you from POCL as regards the operation of the prosecution support section?
No.
One moment, please. No. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Could that document be taken down, please? Thank you.
So I believe Mr. Henry is now going to be asking some questions. There is one document that Mr. Henry...
Sorry, Mr. Blake, can you stop? I can hardly hear you.
It's blocking if one's on, the other one's on.
I
didn't have mine on.
Oh, it's mine. I'm doing it.
Thank you. So there is one document that Mr. Henry will be taking the witness to that the witness hasn't had an opportunity to look at before it's going to be brought up on screen. Mr. Austin, if you need any more time on any of the documents, please do say so, and we can take some more time on that. Thank you very much.
Hello, Mr. Austin. Yes, no desire at all to ambush you. So please do follow Mr. Blake's suggestion. But could we go to FUJ 000 36863, please? Now, sir, is this a document you've seen before?
Sorry, is that
No.
addressed to me, Mr. Henry, or Mr. Austin?
Well, may I, like the duck rabbit, ask you both, sir? Have you
Well,
seen?
I can't put my hand on my heart and say one way or the other. I've seen so many documents, Mr. Henry. But I'm very happy for you and Mr. Austin to discuss this document, and I'll do my best to follow.
Thank you very much, sir.
I've not seen this document.
Well, look, Mr. Austin, I don't want to take you by surprise, and I'm going to make it absolutely clear to you that if you need time to think, please do so. But this is produced, obviously, from Fujitsu. It looks like it's a sort of help desk file because John Simpkins opens up the entry and it's talking about calls. So would you be prepared to agree with that?
Yes.
Good. And it looks like it was opened, if we go to the very top of the page, just underneath the grey headline, opened 9th of December 1999 at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And last update, 21st of February 2000. And so there's a call which we can see at 11 o'clock. Then could we go down a few lines? And we've got at 11 o'clock, again, John Simpkins. It's about 6 or 7 lines down. Epos transactions. The Epos problems look to be related to existing reversals, often of the settlement line. So that looks like it's a balancing the books problem, does it not?
It looks like that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you now to go to page 2, please, the lady who's assisting us. And we can see an entry at line 4 from Mr. Steve Warwick. It's 9/28/14 on the 10th of December, and it says, passing to Epos FP for urgent analysis. This call is related to AI 376 and will require resolution before the commencement of the rollout in January. You see that?
Yep. Yes.
And we know what 376 was, and obviously that would have been a major...
Absolutely.
Quite so. Could we now go to page 5, please? And page 5, there is a Francesco Chiarini. Do you remember Mr. Chiarini?
No, this is when my development team and a lot of my technical experts had moved over into the support environment.
Yes.
So they would have been fronting and going through that process.
So they would have been customer faced?
Yes.
Right, okay.
So, and the support teams, the actual development support teams, the expertise. For example, Steve Warwick, and I don't know who Francesco Chiarini is, but he would have been someone I would assume was in that environment.
I see. Thank you. So we've got here, haven't we, at 11:37:17, and it says, forgive me, FAD 322704, problem in a scales transaction. A fix was delivered in WP 5447 on the 20th of August 99, but the counter had a previous version. Now, is this, and I don't ask you to speculate, but is this an instance where perhaps unknown to people trying to fix things, a fix had already been applied or an update hadn't yet taken place, and so therefore the fix was not effective? The fix was delivered in WP 5477 on the 20th of August 99, but the counter had a previous version, and then it gives WP 4775. The but seems significant, doesn't it?
What it's suggesting is that the fix didn't arrive at the counter. The right version of the fix didn't arrive at the counter. That's what it's suggesting.
Right, thank you. Then we've got below that I'm going to just say fads, about 5 of them. The problem has been identified and can be reproduced. And then I omit words, the other reversals are being investigated. Is this again where the books are not balancing reversals?
That's what it would appear to be,
Yes.
yeah.
Then if we just move down the page to Mr. Chiarini at 14:30:27, further investigation has not been able to get to the root of the problem. And you see that?
Yes.
So this was obviously, as you have said several times, very, very difficult, complex, quite unique problems arising.
Combination of circumstances, yes.
Yes, but obviously this is suboptimal because you've got your brightest and the best, subject to the qualification you gave in evidence, trying to sort this out.
Yes.
Can we go, please, to page 7? And this is at 17:45. It says deleted user Mark McGrath left July 00. I have released a fix for this in WP7029 to be applied after 7012. Can you work that out? Do you know what that means?
No, I'm afraid I can't.
Because you see, the name Austin, and maybe this is a coincidence, appears just after that, doesn't it?
It does, and I can't explain that because I had nothing to do, directly to do with this exchange or in the fixing, because this was a team not reporting into me.
I see. So
I don't know why Austin's there.
I see. You can't, I mean, would this team, even though they weren't reporting into you, given your seminal role in development, might they not have been consulting with you?
No,
No? Not at all?
not at all.
The response was delivered to the system. That's at 17:46. And then could we go, please, to page, forgive me while I just scroll it up. Forgive me, sir, I'm just having difficulty with my one. Yes, could we go to page 8, please? And do you see at the 2nd of February 2000 at 18:17:25, please inform me when this is released to live? Can you remember what that was about?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find
That's
it.
John Simpkins. It's about
Yes,
6 up from the bottom.
Yes.
John Simpkins notified as requested. The fix has been released to live. And then finally, over the page, I'm going to ask you now about Colin Baker. Can you help me, please, about Colin Baker? Who is he?
I don't know.
And this is, sir, you will see it's about the last 8-9 lines. 21st of February 2000, we are unable to test this in PI test, but we are not, in caps, aware of the problems described occurring in our environments. And then this, I can only suggest that we be aware of potential problems and raise them if and when they occur. The call record has been transferred to the team QFP. Do you know what that team was?
No, sorry.
I mean, this does not necessarily appear to be as coherent as what you suggested in evidence, that this is somewhat as and when ad hoc response to problems rather than a coherent policy of investigation and weeding out and rectification.
It does appear like that. I agree. But this was part of, as I said, the development and the testing of and error fixing was within the customer services arena.
Absolutely. And it would be obvious, wouldn't it, that the post office would be aware of this as well.
Yep, I would assume so, yeah.
Absolutely. Could we just consider now, in the time we have, and I will finish before lunch, sir, Horizon for Pockle's specific needs was a frantic afterthought, wasn't it?
No. No, the reason it may appear like that is because we didn't have a documented functional requirement.
And you mentioned that because you thought that it was apparent from both the DSS and Pockle that they thought that they could just give you their functional requirements before it was supposed to go initially live in 1997. You say that in your statement.
Absolutely. It became apparent to me that they didn't understand the basic philosophy of a PFI, in that you write a specification, you then get a quote, and then you deliver to what you said you would deliver and the functional requirement. And that's the reason why, in the contract that we gave to BA and Pockle, in the contract that was signed, it said that within 30 days of the contract being signed, they would sign off the functional requirement.
Right.
Because that's what we had.
Well, let's hold that, because what you've just said there is very, very important. But I want to address a more fundamental problem as to why I suggest it was a bit of a frantic afterthought. You, of course, worked for ICL from 1995 to October 2000.
Correct.
But obviously, Pathway and Horizon have been in development before you joined the company.
Pathway bid team was in before
Yes,
I joined the company,
fine.
yes.
But I want to ask you about this, that the benefit payment card was scrapped in May 1999, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah. And Pockle, of course, wanted to continue with the benefit payment card, but the DSS wouldn't support them.
Is what I understand to be the case.
Yes. ICL were initially supportive of Pockle's position, but eventually, had to accept the inevitable, as did Pockle, that the BPC was dead in the water. Correct?
Yeah, correct.
Absolutely. So that's what I suggest is the reason why it was a frantic afterthought, because what effect did that have on the time you had available to address what Pockle specifically required?
The remaining time that we had to get the release is that we were agreeing with POCL what we'd try and deliver by what dates. And in order to do that, we needed POCL to provide a functional requirement for us and to sign off the designs.
So sorry, sir, I didn't mean to cut across you. I'm just anxious about time because I don't want you to be here after lunch. Could we quickly go to your witness statement, please, at paragraph 8? Your witness statement, forgive me, I had the number to hand, but I don't think it should be. Thank you so much. And if we go to paragraph 8, please. Thank you. Do you see the last 3 lines?
Yes?
You're dealing, first of all, with the DSS, Benefits Agency, and the rejection of the BPC. Then this, there was very little functionality introduced for Pockle, consequently. For Pockle. Consequently, it has limited relevance to the inquiry. In fact, when DSS made the decision to cancel the project in May 1999, all the relevant card, forgive me if we scroll up, software was removed from the ICL pathway solution. The Pockle Horizon project only came into existence in the spring of 1998, and a new agreement with Post Office counters signed in July 1999. In fact, the benefit payment card was scrapped in May 1999, wasn't it?
I've put May 1999. In fact, when the DSS made this, it cancelled the project in May 1999.
Yeah, exactly. So very little functionality for POCL. And you give the explanation in paragraph 9, because it really was because DSS was the dominant partner and the benefit payment card was the priority. And so therefore the BPC had taken precedence. Do you see your exact words? There was no doubt that the DSS were the dominant partner and the benefit payment functionality took precedence over the Epos functionality, which would be developed in parallel over a longer period using the iterative development approach.
I am referring to the initial go live.
Yes.
I'm not referring to the project as a whole. I'm trying to say that initial go live had little relevance because it was mainly BA functionality that we delivered.
But when you say that the DSS material was stripped out of the project, would that have included the work on the fraud management system? Because were you aware that a major component, the fraud management system, was removed from the contract that POCL eventually signed?
Yeah, I can't be sure. I've not heard of the term fraud management system. If you're saying the fraud procedures, we were instructed to remove all the code that was to do with the benefit card system.
So it may have been, and I'm not asking you to speculate, but it may have been that all of this anti-fraud architecture was connected to the benefit card, and when the benefit card was scrapped, then all of that architecture went as well.
I understand the point you're making, and I'm trying to cast my memory back, is that we were instructed that we must remove all the benefit card functionality from the system, which was quite a large task, and really did demotivate my team.
It demotivated?
Very much so, because they had spent quite some time developing that.
Absolutely. They'd invested, as had the company, time and effort. And so therefore, at the very time that you're trying to actually produce something for POCL, your team are obsessed and under the cosh at actually doing completely dead work, removing all of that architecture.
There were two separate teams. The people that were removing the BPS, all the functionality for that, were not the same people that were developing on the POCL side. It was, as I said, being run in parallel. So I'm referring to the fact that we literally had to kill all the software and all the work we'd done on the benefit payment system and then run in parallel and push all our resources into Epos.
So this brings me to my final point. And this was the point that you raised earlier, in fact, about they didn't understand the PFI, etc., etc. Because this actually turned from being a PFI to a turnkey contract, didn't it, effectively?
My colleagues were responsible for that negotiation and the agreement that came to pass. And yes, it became more traditional.
Yes, absolutely. And so this was, as you anticipated, in fact, at the beginning of your statement at paragraph 5, you know, you thought it was an incredibly ambitious timescale, and you thought really from the beginning it ought to have been a turnkey or off the shelf.
I did. That was my personal view.
But of course, turnkey or off the shelf doesn't mean bespoke, does it?
No.
Doesn't even mean made to measure, does it?
No. Well, it means we had got a product, the Repos product, and then we developed the BPS aspect of it, and that was live and ready to go.
But it's very much working out compromises and make, do, and mend, isn't it? Fix.
We still had to deliver to the business functionality. We were guided. We had to develop a system that met the requirement.
I know, but
business requirement.
Unfortunately, however, as is plain, it didn't.
Which bit?
Well, I mean, you even said to Mr. Blake, you didn't understand how you could achieve a product which would deliver to the business what they wanted. I mean, you were doing your best, but it had, as it were, morphed so many times.
That's true. I mean, from a development team, we were getting hit by functionality we'd never seen before.
Exactly.
And it was growing at a massive rate, and my team was growing at a massive rate.
Right. So it comes to this, and this is, I promise you, my final question. You have stated, and Mr. Blake's taken you through it, that paragraph 22 of your statement, no need to bring it up, paragraph 23, you were aware of bugs, errors and defects. July 97, it wasn't sufficiently robust. You bring in Escher and riposte, correct?
Correct.
But paragraph 26, September 99, October 99, no need to bring it up on the screen, FUJ 000079782. I mean, post Escher and riposte, it's still, quite frankly, not fit for purpose, is it?
It didn't go to Escher for that reason. It went to Escher for a specific reason in that the product, Epos, was not interfacing with riposte correctly.
Right.
So the rest of the Epos product was as is. Escher didn't touch it.
Leaving that aside, September, October 99, FUJ 000079782, it was still not fit for purpose.
No, and we had to put sort of substantive corrective actions in place.
But the substantive corrective action, as you say in your statement, was only to concentrate on 80% of the bugs.
No. That's,
Well, let's go to your statement.
no, I did say that. I
Yeah.
just want to clarify.
Okay.
What we said was that we could stabilize the product. We couldn't fix everything. We could stabilize the product by targeting the 80%, because 80% of the bugs and defects were due to a particular area of the system, and we attacked that. We also attacked the others, and fixed a lot of problems in those areas. But the instability issue and the not fit for purpose was mainly due that people were seeing so many large amount of errors that they were using that as a yardstick to determine whether the product was fit for purpose or not. So if you fixed the 80%, you were then left with the 20%, of which a lot of them you did fix, but overall the product was becoming more and more stable.
But nevertheless, given the imminent, well, given the rollout, and given what we now know, that was a catastrophically dangerous thing to have happened because of the number of unknown unknowns and the fact, as you have already said, that when you were fixing things, you were sometimes introducing further problems unintentionally and unwittingly.
Well, when you do that, that's what regression testing was due to find. So, and it did. So if that happened, you couldn't be 100%, but regression testing was there to try and avoid that happening.
But all the time, the post office was aware of this as well. The level of errors, the level of bugs, errors and defects.
I believe so.
Thank you.
Because just to finish,
Yes, please.
I didn't specifically hide that from Puckle. I wasn't, as far as I was concerned, acceptance and the errors and defects we were having, whether it was under the instability issue, which I've discussed prior to that, which was very difficult to crack, 298, and then 376, which was the balancing issues. We took those extremely seriously. And if we'd have not solved those, we wouldn't have achieved acceptance.
Who was your counterpart at Pockle then, if you didn't hide it from Pockle?
I didn't have a counterpart.
You didn't. But you...
The nearest person that would, if you like, I'd be talking with would be John Marr.
John Marr. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you, Mr.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. I just have one very brief follow-up question, and also Mr. Maloney's going to ask a question or two as well.
So no, we have no questions. So we've provided very detailed Rule 10 requests, and if we may say with respect, Mr. Blake has very ably covered all the questions we identified in respect of this witness, so we have no
Fine.
questions.
That's fine.
Thank you very much. So just one question from me then. We've seen the peak and pinnacles, and I think your evidence was that you believe that the post office had access to those. Would it surprise you if, in fact, they didn't have access to those?
I believe that POCL had people that were part of the help desk community. So from that perspective, I can't believe that they weren't given access to that system. I don't know whether they were able to contribute to it, but I can't believe they weren't given access to it. They were part of the same team of experts.
And would it have been best practice for them to have had access?
I would, yes.
Thank you very much. Sir, I don't have any questions unless you do, sir.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Austin, there was reference in one of the emails, which Mr. Blake showed you, to a man called Gareth Jenkins.
Yes.
Was Mr. Jenkins part of your team?
Not that I can remember.
Did you know him at all?
Not that I can recall.
Fine. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for making your statement, Mr. Austin, and also for coming to give oral evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you. 2 o'clock, please, sir. 2 o'clock.
Certainly. Yeah.
Sure.